All right, let's talk a little bit more about what our ancestors probably ate. Primates are omnivores, and an omnivore, omni means everything. So omnivores eat both plants and animals. And these are a couple of omnivores that you're probably familiar with. Bears are omnivores. A lot of birds are omnivores, including crows. And one of the things that omnivores have in common is that they can't digest cellulose from plants. Herbivores have a way to digest cellulose from plants. Either they have a compartment in their stomach like ruminants do, which would include cows, goats, sheep. They're ruminants. They have a compartment in their stomach that allows them to digest cellulose. And actually, it's the bacteria in their gut that they're feeding. So bacteria in their gut eat the cellulose, and then that plant material moves down the rest of the digestive system. And in fact, then the cow is getting most of its calories from digesting the bacteria that it's feeding, not from the plants that it's eating. So that's why ruminants can survive on such a poor diet. So cows can eat pretty much just grass. And then there are the hindgut fermenters, which aren't quite as efficient, but still can survive on a diet that's almost 100% plants. And those would be things like horses and rabbits. Although because they don't ferment in their gut quite as well, they do have bacteria in their gut that break down cellulose. They don't do it quite as efficiently as ruminants. So rabbits and horses need a better quality diet than a goat, for example. Goats can live on the worst possible plant diet, the most nutrient deficient diet, because they have all those bacteria in their rumen that are making all kinds of stuff that they eat, including fatty acids and proteins and vitamins. So herbivores generally either have the ruminants or their hindgut fermenters like rabbits. Omnivores and carnivores don't have any ability to break down cellulose from plants. And that's the category we're in. Although most primates are moderate hindgut fermenters. Not quite as good as a rabbit or a horse, but better than us. So the three diet categories that you probably heard of are vegans, which would mean if somebody says that they're a vegan, generally they mean that they eat 100% plants. They eat no animals at all, not even dairy products or butter. They eat 100% plants. If someone calls themselves a vegetarian, generally that means that they just don't eat dead animals, but they do eat eggs, they eat cheese, they drink milk, they do consume animal products and they use butter, they just don't eat flesh. Sometimes people call themselves vegetarians and they include fish in their diet because they don't count that as meat. But really, a vegetarian diet is an omnivorous diet. So somebody who's an omnivore, which is almost everybody, that means you're eating some animal products and some plants. That's what almost all humans eat. So if we want to know what is the normal optimal diet for a human being, how should we take care of ourselves? What is our diet? One of the questions we could ask is, what do all the other primates eat? And the other primates are all omnivores. Although all the other primates have some hindgut fermentation, which we don't have. Instead, so they still do, though, eat some animals, even if it's only insects, but they still eat some animals. What did the extinct hominins eat? All of those Australopithecines and all those extinct members of our genus, well, 100% of them hunted or scavenged for animal products. And this is not even a slightly bit controversial among anthropologists. All the evidence agrees, from looking at the kind of tools that they had to looking at when we find remains of Australopithecines and hominids, we find butchered and burned animal bones with them, indicating that they were eating them. We also find consistent evidence of them also eating plants, including in remains, again, that we find along with them. What has our species been eating? So our species has been around for 250,000 years. And for all of that time, our species is a hunting species. And we eat plants, whatever's local to where we are. And we also eat a lot of meat and animal products. The dairy industry is relatively more recent. All the humans have been consuming milk from animals other than our mothers only for about 10,000 years. So that's a more recent human innovation. And if we can just look at our biology as well, without even looking at ancient humans, and ask, what kind of a gut do we have? And in fact, if we look at our digestive system, it's much more like a carnivore gut. So a carnivore, and in this case, I'm talking about like wolves, cats. They have prominent canine teeth, which we don't have. This is the one way, teeth is the one way we're not like a carnivore. If you have a cat or a dog, look at their molars. Their molars are sharp. They aren't flat like our molars. Our molars are meant for grinding foods, not for tearing meat like a carnivore's. Carnivores tend to have a very acidic stomach, a pH of around 2, and we have that. Unlike almost all the rest of the primates, we have an acidic stomach. The rest of the primates, their stomach is less acidic than ours. We have no fermentation to break down cellulose. The amount of fermentation that we have is very small in our large intestine. We do have a little bit of breakdown of cellulose by bacteria, but less than 10% of the cellulose we consume gets broken down. We call cellulose fiber because it passes right through. That's what happens. And even, cats and dogs and wild cats and wolves do eat some plants in the wild. They will eat grass and berries and things like that. Or even the stomach contents of the herbivores that they kill. They'll eat that too. Carnivores generally have some bacteria living in the large intestine that make some vitamins. The bacteria in our large intestine make vitamin K. They make one of the B vitamins, but not B12. And have a relatively short intestine. Our intestines aren't as short as wolves and lions, but they're much shorter than the rest of the primates. We have a very short small intestine and large intestine for a primate. Another feature of carnivores is that they generally can fast for days without harm and eat no food. And humans, we can certainly do that. You've probably fasted for at least a day for some kind of medical procedure or for religious reasons. Humans can, even a human that's not overweight at all, an adult human can easily fast for a day or even up to 3 days without really any medical concern. Herbivores can't do that. So generally, herbivores have a fermenting compartment in their digestive system. Either one of their stomach compartments called the rumen, which would be for the ruminants, or they have a large fermenting cecum attached to their large intestine, which we don't have. But most other primates do have a large cecum that has fermenting bacteria in it. We don't have either one of those things. Herbivores tend to have a very long intestine and a very slow transition time through the intestine because plants take a long time to digest. So we don't have that. We have a rapid transition short gut. Molars tend to grind side to side. We don't do that, although we do have flat molars. In these animals that have either a rumen or a fermenting cecum, they contain bacteria that can make vitamin B12. The only organisms that make B12 are bacteria. So if you don't have those bacteria living in your body that can make B12, you have to get B12 in your diet. So humans do not get B12 from our fermenting bacteria, and most of the rest of the primates as well don't get enough B12. They do have some fermenting bacteria in their gut, but they still need to consume some B12 in their diet. B12 is found in animal products. This is one of the things that makes eating zero animal products very risky, is B12. Herbivores also get proteins and fatty acids from the bacteria that they digest. That's how a cow is able to get to be 900 pounds just eating grass, because it's really eating a high-fat diet. It's eating the bacteria. The rumen is a place where the bacteria live. The cow feeds the bacteria by eating grass, and then the cow eats and digests the bacteria as they move further down the digestive tract. Herbivores spend a lot of time eating, hours and hours, almost the whole day. And if you compare the amount of time chimpanzees spend eating in a day in the wild and humans spend eating, there's a huge difference. The average human, even if you look at hunter-gatherers, they might spend 90 minutes to 2 hours a day actually putting food in their mouth and chewing and eating. A chimpanzee will spend 4 to 5 times that amount. They will spend 8 hours a day or more eating. So that's much more typical for a herbivore. So our natural diet is an omnivorous diet, and there's some ways we can tell that. We can tell that plants need to be a part of our diet because we totally lack vitamin C synthesis. Most mammals can make their own vitamin C. Your cat and dog can make their own vitamin C. Cows can make their own vitamin C. But all primates lack the ability to make vitamin C. So humans who don't have access to plants for large portions of the year, like people who live in the Arctic, would go to great lengths to obtain plant foods in the summer, like berries when they were ripe, and preserve them by mixing them with fat or something and preserving them for the winter. So vitamin C is, with plants, is where vitamin C comes from. There is a little bit of vitamin C in meat. If you're eating fresh meat, not like canned meat or beef jerky, but you know, if you're eating a steak, for example, there's some vitamin C in there, but it's not quite enough for an animal that can't make it at all. We also totally lack B12 synthesis. Only bacteria make it, and we also totally lack the bacteria in our gut that make B12. So, and B12 deficiency is deadly. B12 is extremely important for the function of mitochondria. We can't digest cellulose at all. We have almost no gut fermentation. Less than 10% of the cellulose that you consume is broken down by intestinal bacteria. Iron and even protein from plants are very poorly absorbed. So you probably know that some plants do have a lot of iron, like spinach and some legumes. And legumes also, especially soy, have protein. However, it's not very well absorbed. Iron and protein from meat is very well absorbed, almost 100% absorbed. Iron and protein from plants, and depending on the plant, sometimes only 50% of the protein is even absorbed. It's just much harder for us to digest because, again, we lack those fermenting bacteria. We don't break it down very well. Plants also lack 2 of the 4 essential fatty acids. There are 4 fatty acids that we need that we have to get in our diet. 2 of them are only found in animals. So people who are eating an entirely plant-based diet are going to slowly become deficient in those fatty acids. And those are especially needed by children for brain development. All primates that are alive today are omnivores, and all the extinct hominins were omnivores, even if that means that they just eat insects along with their plants. So even the primates like leaf-eating monkeys who eat huge amounts of plant material, if they don't get some insects in their diet, they die. And that was found out accidentally by some zoos at the beginning of the 20th century who were starting to increase their collections with these different kinds of monkeys. And they found out that all primates are omnivores, and that if all you give them are plants, in a few months they're all dead. They need to have at least insects to eat along with their plants. All humans have been omnivores and had to have been until the last 50 years because synthetic B12 only became available in the 1960s. So before 1960, nobody could have been a vegan. Nobody, because anybody who tried to eat 100% plants for any extended period of time would have died of vitamin B12 deficiency. I have heard stories in the vegan community that it's because of soil depletion, and that if you don't wash your produce, that there's B12 in the dirt, and you're going to get B12 on if you eat dirty carrots and stuff. No, that is not going to work. Don't try that. You will die of B12 deficiency. Don't do that. We have also found out the hard way in the last 20 years or so that putting small children on a vegan diet can cause them permanent injury and can even be fatal. There are literally dozens of parents who have been prosecuted for child abuse and homicide for slowly starving their children to death on a vegan diet, especially for toddlers and babies. This is a slow death from deficiency. And if that's not evidence that a vegan diet is not the natural human diet, I don't know what is. So what if you want to be a vegetarian or a vegan for ethical reasons? A vegetarian diet is an omnivorous diet. If you're going to be a vegetarian, just make sure that you're including products that have B12, like egg yolks and full-fat dairy, which will have the essential fatty acids that are missing in plant foods. And make sure that you check for B12 and iron levels, because in long-term vegetarians, people who've been a vegetarian like for 20 years or more, B12 and iron deficiency are really common, even if they eat eggs and cheese. A vegan diet is very risky. A vegan diet is missing multiple key nutrients, especially B12, if you're doing it long-term. If you want to think of a vegan diet as being a temporary fast, like if you want to be a vegan for the month of January, that would be perfectly fine. But if you want to be a vegan for years, you have to supplement B12. After about 6 months, between 6 months and a year is when the B12 deficiency symptoms usually first appear. And often by the time symptoms first appear, which can show up as shakiness, muscle weakness, losing balance, losing the ability to walk, often there's already permanent nerve damage. And ultimately, B12 deficiency leads to death. So it's extremely serious, and there's no way to get B12 from eating dirty produce, from seaweed or sea vegetables or something. B12 is easily, and there's actually vegan B12, because B12 is made by bacteria. We can make it in huge vats. So make sure that you're supplementing. Another deficiency that shows up in vegans is protein deficiency. Protein deficiency will take years to show, but as there are more and more people who are vegan for years, it's been shown, there were several studies done in Australia on people who were long-term vegans, and they showed symptoms like poor wound healing, evidence of very early osteoporosis, early meaning they're very young. They have osteoporosis at a very young age, because your bones are mostly made out of protein. So that's one of the first places in an adult where protein deficiency shows up, is in osteoporosis. There are a couple of hospitals in Australia that no longer will do surgery. They'll do emergency surgery, but they won't do non-emergency surgeries on vegans because of their poor outcomes, their poor wound healing, and they tend to have iron deficiencies. There was a study done where they looked at vegetarians and vegans just to check them. They just asked people, what kind of a diet did you eat? And 100% of the vegans that they surveyed in this study, which there were like 50 or 60 vegans in this study, 100% of them were iron and B12 deficient. And a significant portion of the vegetarians were as well, but it wasn't 100%. And almost none of the people eating a standard omnivorous diet were B12 or iron deficient. So clearly these deficiencies are diet related. So if you want to be a vegan or a vegetarian, just be smart about it and know what supplements you need to take. So our species, how do we know where our species originated? The current most popular hypothesis, well, I should say it's a theory now because we have so much evidence for it, is that our species first evolved in Africa and then moved out from there. One of the pieces of evidence for that is the fact that if you're looking at human remains, we only find remains of our species in Africa for the first 150,000 years our species existed. We only find the remains in Africa. That's a pretty strong indicator that that's where our species originated. Another interesting tidbit is the huge genetic diversity of modern Africans today. As DNA sequencing is gradually being expanded and tens of thousands of new people are having their DNA sequenced every year now because it's cheap. You know, this is something that's happened since the 90s. More and more people are having their DNA sampled, and scientists are traveling to different places in the world and sampling people's DNA with their permission, of course. We are finding that modern Africans' genetic diversity is absolutely unbelievable. It is so much greater than the rest of humanity, and that's something that we see for all species. That as you get closer to where that species first appeared, you find greater genetic diversity. So the greatest genetic diversity in humans is in sub-Saharan Africa, in the same population that are featured in that BBC video about persistence hunting, the San people. These people have absolutely unbelievable genetic diversity. It's so huge that when the researchers first started getting their results back, they thought there was a mistake because they were so used to sampling Europeans that when they saw this, so much genetic diversity within a single village, they thought, oh, this can't be right. But it is. And so that indicates that in what is South Africa and Botswana today is the closest to where our species originated. Now, that doesn't mean that the people who live there now are somehow like ancestral humans or something. No, they've been evolving along their own path, but they have much greater genetic diversity than anywhere else on the planet. And it's something that, because most Americans and Europeans and Asians are so unfamiliar with the people who live in Africa, just in terms of morphology, the tallest people in the world and the shortest, and I mean as a population, not individuals, the tallest population in the world and the shortest population in the world are both from Africa. And you probably have heard that came out about 5 years ago. Oh, people in the Netherlands are the tallest in the world. Well, if you count it by country, but if you look at populations, no, that's not true at all. In fact, the tallest people in the world are in fact in Africa. And I believe the tribe is the Dinka tribe is the tallest people in the world, and the shortest people in the world live not too far away. Another interesting part of this is that the greatest language sound diversity is also found in the same population, in the San people in sub-Saharan Africa. So one of the things that anthropologists and linguists have noted for a long time is that as human populations migrate, sounds tend to be lost from languages. More sounds are lost than are gained. New sounds can be gained, but more sounds tend to be lost as populations migrate. So as populations migrate, they tend to have fewer sounds in their language. And so we can ask then, and languages just change over time as well. So one question we can ask is, which human languages have the most sounds? Well, it's in the same population. And I have a little YouTube video here of a little sampling of one of those languages, the Xhosa language, which I'm not even saying it right because that XH stands for a click. These are, there's several languages that are called the click languages. They use sounds that no other human languages use, and they also use most of the sounds that all the other languages use as well. They have a huge number of sounds in their language. So these languages are thought by linguists to probably be more representative of what the first human languages were like 50,000 years ago or so than any other language. So this is a little sampling. This is a woman going through all of the different click sounds, because it's not just one. I think there's 8 or 10 different clicks. And so she goes through them and says some words that have those various sounds in them.
Those are all the words with an X. In English, you say the frog is jumping in the rain. In Xhosa, we say Ikoko, the frog, Likuma is jumping in the rain. So when you jump, we say we are Kuma in Xhosa. And the GQ, a doctor is ugqirha, a lawyer igqwetha. HL, hleka, hlomla, hlala phansi, hluhluwe. When you laugh, we say we are hleka. CH, chopa, chola, chocha. When you pick up something, we say chola. RH, chola, chocho, chona. When you are snoring, we say we are chona. KR, chwemba, chocha, chila, when you're not satisfied, we say we are chocha. Q, iqaqala, ziqiqaqiqa, kuqaqaqala, qawukuqoqoqola, qabele qawuke. So the sound of the Q and the X is, sometimes you can have the G and the X, iqalaba, which is the shoulder, we call it iqalaba in our language. And you can have the NKQ, ingandosi, that's how we pronounce the NKC. So those are the Xhosa clicks.
Another way that we can study the DNA is not to look at the entire DNA sequence, but instead to look at specific bits of DNA that don't recombine or change as much. And one of those kinds of DNA is mitochondrial DNA. If you remember when we talked about mitochondria being endosymbionts, mitochondria in our cells have their own little bacterial chromosomes with only a few genes on them. Human mitochondria have, I can't remember if it's 12 or 18 genes, not very many genes. And these don't mix generation to generation. Each human gets their mitochondria from their mother. So the mitochondria are in the egg that got fertilized. So your mitochondrial DNA is an exact match to your mother's mitochondrial DNA, to her mother's mitochondrial DNA, and her mother's mitochondrial DNA, because it doesn't recombine or mix generation after generation. So it's a way that we can trace back heredity for even hundreds of generations. The furthest back I have heard about this being traced was in Canada. There was some human remains found, and they extracted mitochondrial DNA, and they tested some of the local indigenous people living in the area, and they found a woman whose mitochondrial DNA was an exact match for these remains that they found that were 2,000 years old. So this woman and her ancestors have been living in the exact same area for at least 2,000 years. So that's something we can't do with the chromosomal, the rest of the nuclear DNA, is because it just gets recombined too much generation after generation. But the mitochondrial DNA only changes if there's a mutation. It doesn't mix. So your father's mitochondrial DNA does not get passed on. And so we can take this mitochondrial DNA and make a little family tree for the mitochondrial DNA and ask, okay, considering how often mutations occur, we can use the molecular clock method to trace back and ask, okay, when were all these mitochondria the same? How long would it take to get all of the different kinds of mitochondrial DNA that we see today from a single ancestor? And when we ask that question for human mitochondrial DNA, we get an answer of about 200,000 years ago. And what that means is that all of the mitochondria in all of the humans so far tested today can trace their origins back to a single small population that was living in Africa about 200,000 years ago. And it doesn't mean that there was a single person in that population who was the mitochondrial Eve, as they sometimes call it. But other mitochondrial lines that were existent at that time went extinct. So probably the number of humans in our species 200,000 years ago was maybe about 10,000 individuals, which is a relatively small population. All the mitochondrial lines have gone extinct except for one, and that is the ancestor of all of the mitochondria. And a mitochondrial line goes extinct if we have one generation with no female offspring. That's all that means. So that's fairly easy for that to happen just by chance. Another piece of DNA that we can study is the Y chromosome. And the Y chromosome is what males have. And again, like the mitochondrial DNA, it doesn't recombine with any other chromosomes and it doesn't get mixed. The Y chromosome is passed on from father to son, generation after generation, almost intact. There's a little bit of it that mixes with the X chromosome, but there's large sections of it that we can compare many, many generations back. This was in fact used, the Y chromosome was used to try to estimate how many offspring Genghis Khan, or how many descendants Genghis Khan has today, based on Y chromosome data. This, when you take all of the Y chromosomes today, originally when the first study was done about 10 years ago, all of the Y chromosomes traced back using that same molecular clock method to about 142,000 years ago. But recently, a new type of Y chromosome was found, and this is part of the evidence that there was yet another hybridization event in Africa with another species, not Neanderthals, not Denisovans, but another human species. There was another hybridization event, and there's a small population in West Africa that has this Y chromosome that when we do the same molecular clock method, we get a much, much older date that predates our species by at least 100,000 years. So another cool little tidbit, and actually the person that they first discovered this Y chromosome in was actually an American, an African American. And then they went looking for other individuals in Africa who had the exact same Y chromosome, and they in fact traced it back to one particular village in West Africa. I think maybe in Ghana. I think that was the country that they traced it to. So that was kind of cool. Again, showing the great genetic diversity in people who have African ancestry. So what all of these pieces of information show us, the Y chromosome data, the mitochondrial DNA, the language sound diversity information, the nuclear genome diversity information, all of this indicates that our species has a single origin in Africa. There's a competing hypothesis. So that hypothesis is called the out of Africa hypothesis. The competing hypothesis is called the multi-regional hypothesis, which has been around for over 100 years. This hypothesis is wrong. It lingers on because racists like it. So the multi-regional hypothesis says that There were different hypotheses of Homo erectus, because you remember Homo erectus left Africa. We find remains of Homo erectus in very southern part of Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia. And so the hypothesis goes that Homo erectus evolved into modern humans in different places, and in fact, that would make modern humans fall into different species, and that in fact, modern Africans, modern Europeans, modern Asians, and Australians are very distantly related and separated by several million years of evolution. This hypothesis is not supported by the evidence, however, but it lingers. So if you hear this hypothesis, just know it's wrong. Because when the data does not support our hypothesis, we have to throw it in the trash, and that's where this one belongs. It was a reasonable hypothesis 150 years ago before we had any evidence. Okay, so the out of Africa hypothesis says that all humans today, our species, share a recent common ancestor in Africa less than 200,000 years ago. We're all a single species. We're not even different enough to really have subspecies. So that, another word for that is race. So biological race doesn't really exist because we're not different enough. So what really happened is these other Asian Homo erectus, Australian or Indonesian Homo erectus, like Homo floresiensis, Neanderthals, these were all dead ends. These were all evolutionary dead ends. They don't have any descendants remaining today. And in fact, our species evolved in Africa from Homo heidelbergensis and then migrated out from there. So all humans alive today share a common recent origin, and we are in fact a single recently evolved species. So human migration, so the first migrations were into the Middle East and Asia, then Europe, then Australia. Humans made it all the way to the very southern part of Australia by 40,000 years ago. It was very rapid. The migration to Australia was very rapid. And then the migration to North America and South America. And probably, I mean, this shows kind of an inland route here. There's a lot of evidence now that there was a much more rapid migration along the coast, and that possibly humans made it all the way to South America along the coast before the interior of North America had even been colonized by any humans. And when this happened, it's quite clear that there were many humans living in North and South America 15,000 years ago. Exactly how soon it happened before that is a matter of very hot, contentious debate at this point. Most anthropologists kind of fall in the probably, 20,000 at the earliest, but there are people who have found remains in South America that they claim are close to 30,000 years old. So they need more evidence, though. When you're claiming something very extraordinary like that, we need to find more evidence. So very interesting evidence. There's interesting little tantalizing bits of evidence that possibly there was contact between Pacific Islanders, Polynesians, and South Americans way before Europeans ever came on the scene. There's even some tantalizing, interesting evidence that possibly there was contact between Africans and individuals in Melanesia way before Europeans and their ships showed up. So there's a lot of more data still to find about human migration and contact between different human peoples. That's one thing we can tell for sure. Humans have always liked to trade for things. We always have liked to trade for jewelry and weapons and clothes and musical instruments and dogs and other domesticated animals and crops. And the way those things move around and we find them is a good way to tell how much contact there had been. Okay, so we talked about our closest living relative is the chimpanzee, although we did not evolve from the chimpanzee. They've been evolving along their own path. We have been evolving along our own path. Our common ancestor with them lived about 8 million years ago and was extinct, whatever that species was. Our species evolved in Africa over millions of years. There were 3 migrations out of Africa of hominins. So Homo erectus evolved in Africa and then migrated out and actually went really far, all the way to what's now Indonesia. Homo heidelbergensis migrated out to Asia and Europe, and then our species migrated out. Hominin evolution is a branching bush, not a ladder leading to us, but a branching bush, and up to 7 or 8 different species in our genus coexisted with us since our species first evolved. And they've all gone extinct except ours, except for the little bit of DNA that we have. And it looks like our species did interbreed with to a small extent with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and a mysterious unknown species in Africa that we haven't confirmed yet because we don't have bones that we can extract DNA from. So, and new stuff is being discovered all the time. New species are being discovered every few years, which is it's always surprising. There's always more. It's hard to keep up to date on the human evolution stuff because there's always so many new discoveries. Okay, I hope you learned something from this. That's the end of human evolution.